Welcome, everyone, to the Sports Illustrated Media Podcast. I am your host, Jimmy Traina. Thank you for listening. Hope everybody out there had a great Thanksgiving. Got a good episode here for you today. James Andrew Miller, author extraordinaire, is on the show, who has a new book out about HBO, and he covers everything about HBO, every show that's been on there, and shares a lot of inside details and stuff. Sopranos, Curb, Larry Sanders Show. Get into the history of HBO with Jim Miller. We also talk about some ESPN and Manningcast stuff as well. And then following Jim, Salicata joins me for the weekly Train of Thought segment, where we get into the college football circus that has taken place and a couple of other things. The Will Ferrell story that came out this week with Adam McKay not being friends and partners anymore, and talk about a couple of other things with Sal. So that's all on this episode. If you missed it last week, we did an all Train of Thoughts edition of the SI Media Podcast. 2 weeks ago, Kenny Mayne. 3 weeks ago, Becky Lynch and Kevin Clark. 4 weeks ago, Al Michaels. So if you missed any of those episodes, check them out in the archives, rate and review. All right, let's get to Jim Miller, followed by Train of Thoughts right here on this episode of the SI Media Podcast. All right, joining me now, SI Media Podcast regular, brand new book out about HBO that I am thoroughly enjoying. And of course, the man who knows everything about ESPN, Saturday Night Live, a bunch of other things, James Andrew Miller. Jim, how are you?
Hey, Jimmy, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm well. My pleasure. Loving the HBO book. I don't want to scare people and tell them it's 950 pages, but there's a lot of juicy stuff in that book that I've enjoyed. 950 pages, though, is a chore.
It goes fast, but it's nearly 50 years, and I try and write books of record. So,
and this is definitely of record. There's no doubt. Before we get into the book, because there's a lot there, a couple of just sports media things. I don't go a week on this podcast without talking about the Manningcast. It's been a huge hit for ESPN. You sort of know all of the inner workings of ESPN. I would imagine in Bristol they could not have asked for anything better in terms of reception and ratings for this?
Yeah, I mean, look, remember that they asked for Peyton to be in the booth several years ago. So you start from there, and that was an obvious ask. And I think Peyton was smart about his decision. There were a variety of factors involved in why he said no. But you got to, look, you got to give credit to ESPN for this thing. I mean, we've talked about this before. It's how often do you really get something that adds to, the sport in sports media in a meaningful, fun, crazy way? And, I just love it. I actually love the X's and O's about it, even more than anything else. I mean, it's obviously entertaining, and it's kind of fun to see the dynamic between the two of them, but it's really cool if you love football.
Yeah, I think they're in an interesting spot because the fan in me who watches it, I'm a little nervous. I don't want any tweaking. I feel like executives try to get involved. And I know this is an Omaha deal as well, so maybe that won't happen as much if it was just an ESPN deal. But someone's going to try to come in and act like they're smart and do something different. That's always my fear, and tweak something about it. Now, the flip side of that is a lot of people, and I've now become in this camp, think we don't need 4 guests every week with them. They're so good on their own, especially like you said with the X's and O's. I'd like to see them maybe go to 2 guests. I don't think they're going to make any changes this season, maybe next season. I don't know if they think it's a lot to handle just Peyton and Eli if they don't have the guests. But the only criticism I hear, and it's constructive, it's not negative, is less guests, more Peyton and Eli. Do you know if there's any internal discussions about that at ESPN?
I mean, look, they are thinking about that. In some ways, it's like this crazy version of the Tonight Show in a way, that these people come in and, the brothers actually do play host, and people are asked questions and they do their bits, and they do. I think that the 4 guests was born out of a concern that if it's just the 2 guys, especially because Eli is somewhat innervated, although I think he does a great job, and he does a great job at not trying to upstage his brother, and he knows his lane and he knows who he is. He's not trying to be somebody else. I think there was an initial concern that, you got to populate this with people. And by the way, let's just say that they've done a terrific job at booking the show. Like 4 guests every week and 4 guests that you kind of care about. I mean, there haven't been, big strikeouts in terms of like, well, why are they bringing on so-and-so and so-and-so is boring and so-and-so. I mean, some of these people are about as good as I've seen them in terms of like talking and being interviewed and talking about the game and stuff. So it's a really high level of difficulty that they're pulling off. At the end of the day, though, I'm going to probably side with you. I think 4 is too much. Whether it's 2 or 3 is beside the point. But otherwise, just let the Mannings be Mannings and don't screw around with it.
Yeah. We're taping this on December 1st. So now you're going to start seeing a lot of year-end pieces. I had to write a little something for Sports Illustrated just on some of the best of or biggest of the year type things. And I said the biggest, I think, story in sports, the biggest thing in sports television was the success of the Manningcast. And then I said the biggest controversy of the year, I thought, was the Maria Taylor, Rachel Nichols situation at ESPN, where they're both gone from ESPN now. Where do we, as a year-end type of thing, where does ESPN stand right now? Do you think they've stabilized things after the rough summer with that controversy? Are there still issues they've got going on? What's the sort of the state of the union in ESPN?
I mean, look, ESPN, the Maria Taylor, Rachel Nichols thing, I think just in terms of personalities in sports media, obviously the biggest, and it has social, racial, cultural dimensions to it that we still haven't fully explored. There's a lot that, quite frankly, I've been told on background that, and I'm sure you have too, that hasn't come out yet. And it's all incredibly sad and incredibly frustrating. That said, I think that if you're Jimmy Bitar and you're looking back on the year, working backwards, just 30,000 feet, would have loved the EPL. NBC did a great job of keeping it. Very, very happy about hockey and PGA. And of course, the big player is the NFL deal and the schedule and the playoff and everything else, repairing their relationship with the league, which was job number 1 for Jimmy. So I think that Jimmy's got enough to look back on to feel like it's been a successful year. There are big questions lurking out there for ESPN in the coming years and probably in the coming year that are going to have to be solved, including a big one with Burbank, which is, are they going to spin this thing off? As much as they say they're not, it makes me think that they have to consider it and get closer to it. And of course, you have an NBA deal, you have other deals coming up. Are the resources going to be there? What is the fundamental equation going to be like with Burbank, and how much of that money is going to be spent for new rights? And I think, we're going to start to see that pretty soon.
Last thing before we get to the book, the NFL has to be happy with their season. Ratings up. 39 million people watched Raiders Cowboys on Thanksgiving. More surprisingly, 26 million nut jobs watched Lions Bears. Any reason for the big rate? We're out of COVID, we're out of the pandemic, so obviously ratings are going to be up from 2020, but things have been up since from 2019. Anything you attribute that to?
I think, it's kind of weird, right? Because there was a period during the pandemic where we thought football was coming back, and then it just crested, right? And it wasn't like that big explosion that we thought it would be. Right. But I feel like for whatever reason, and I guess the quality of play, there's a lot of great matchups. There's a lot of closer games. And I feel like people have really settled back into an NFL routine. And they're loving it. It was huge on Thanksgiving.
You didn't give the one reason that I would give as a degenerate, and that's the gambling situation and all this. I think,
look, that's my fault only because I think it's a given. I also believe, look, I'm glad that gambling is legal and, good, you can do this in New Jersey. I think gambling has always been a big part of the NFL, and there's it's obviously, out in the open now, being embraced in a way that we never could have imagined before. And I think the only thing that can hurt it is when you get teams like my Eagles. Last Sunday you're watching the game and it makes you so car sick. You're so tempted to turn it off. I mean, I think that there's a lot of competitiveness going into the final month of the season, and teams are, I think a lot of teams are still in the hunt, and the matchups are great. So,
there's no great team this year. There's not one team that's great. So I think that's going to make for a wild playoffs, which will be
when
great
you get
for
your,
the NFL.
if you get the Brady Belichick Super Bowl, that's got to be.
I tweeted about that weeks ago. I hope it happens.
Got to be in the back of everybody's mind.
Yep.
And you can't bet against either of those.
Would love to see a rating for that one.
It would be huge.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the HBO book. It's called Tinderbox. It's out now everywhere. Tinderbox, and it is literally everything about HBO. I mean, there is nothing that was not mentioned. I love seeing the really old references to in the early 80s, you mentioned First and 10. You mentioned not necessarily the news, two shows that blew me away when I was a kid. More current, there's a lot of sports stuff in there inside the NFL. Obviously, the history of boxing. People might not remember Wimbledon was part of HBO. Let me start with the shows, though, and then maybe we'll do a little bit of the sports in HBO. There was a lot of Gary Shandling in the book, which I enjoyed because I love the Larry Sanders Show. And I didn't realize, so there are a lot of issues on this set with Gary in real life, and Artie, who was played by Rip Torn, also had some issues. But the show was phenomenal. How does that happen where the off-screen stuff doesn't affect what we see on the air and it's still so great?
That's pretty remarkable, isn't it? I mean, One of the things that I try to do in this book, we all have shows on HBO that we love. And I mean, Larry Sanders is obviously one of them, and Sopranos and Curb, you and I talk about all the time, and Sex and the City, and all the way up through, Succession. And I think that one of the things that I wanted to do in this book is I wanted to show people, look, what you see every week, but this is what's been going on behind the scenes. This is the drama that goes on that we don't get to see. And these are the decisions that get made that affect what we see. And these are the people making the decisions. Sometimes, I don't think a lot of people know outside of Hollywood the name Chris Albrecht or Carolyn Strauss, but those are people that had a huge, huge impact on HBO and our lives. And so one of the things that I tried to do was try to explain who they are, tried to explain some of the chaos that was going on and some of the incredible great moves that were going on behind the scenes at HBO. And that, especially with Game of Thrones and others, and show people that it's an iceberg. For everything you see on a Sunday night, there's a whole lot of shit going on underneath the water.
Yeah. And there was a lot of shit with the Larry Sanders Show. That's for sure.
Well, that's the thing. Larry was crazy. Right. And it's great to have people like Peter Tolan, who's a wonderful writer, and obviously Judd Apatow and others talk about Gary's neuroses. Gary Shandling himself didn't shy away from talking about his neuroses, but I think it was important to try and place it in the context of the show. If you're trying to get a show out every single week, and this is who's at the center of it, and this are some of his demons, and this is some of his, the way he's overextended and the way it's manifesting itself, both in terms of the workload and his own health. People talk about what kind of medicine he's taken and the kind of, long days he's had. That to me is, something I really want to dig into.
It was interesting too, because it was fun. There's a thing in there about, I guess someone was going to quote unquote expose Gary Shandling's drug problem, but it was Ambien. And there is a whole thing in the book about James Gandolfini did have a drug and alcohol problem. There was an intervention. And it seemed for the two of them, the pressure of constantly having to do that show every year really got to them, especially for James Gandolfini, who had to get into the Tony Soprano character, and it wore him down. Then you have the flip side, which is Larry David, which HBO basically told Larry, you do the show whenever you want. You want to take 1 year off, 2 years off, 3 years off, 4 years, it's interesting. The dichotomy there I thought was very interesting between Gary Shandling and James Gandolfini, and then Larry David in sort of how they handled the shows.
So the truth is, I mean, look, acting is difficult and great acting is even harder, but you bring yourself with you. You know, you can't, it's not like when you go on a set, you're obviously becoming another character, but you're still the same human being inside. And one of the things I think that we saw with James Gandolfini was that he had a dark side to him that he knew about even as a teenager, and playing Tony Soprano forced him to tap into that dark side. So it became incredibly debilitating for him. And it became very, very hard. There's a great quote, you know, somebody says, you know, he said to somebody, "You don't know what the show is doing to me." And you just feel for him. And of course, he was so incredibly talented, so loved by his castmates and obviously the public. And you just think, you know, your heart goes out to the guy.
I never knew he had those addiction problems. I never knew it until your book, I think, came out.
Yeah, no, it was formidable. I mean, Larry, the funny thing is that Larry has always been like a happy Larry, right? I mean, even back to SNL, where he could barely get a sketch on the air and his stand-up life wasn't doing great. I mean, if you think about Larry David before Seinfeld, it's a tough story. I mean, he really hung in there, and he had financial difficulties, and he had a really tough road. I think one of the things that HBO did that was so smart, and they said to Larry David, not only whenever, but however and whatever.
Yeah.
So you can't be in business with Larry David for 20 years, basically, and have any guardrails up. I mean, can you imagine being like a young HBO executive and like you're supposed to give Larry David notes on forget it. Just go to the Grand Canyon and take a swan dive. And I think that they've been really smart about how they've treated him, and obviously he's happy about it.
That's the thing. Larry still wouldn't be doing it if they were giving him notes. That, you know, he's got the power there, which is great.
But that's part of what HBO does throughout its history, which is that they decide to do and perform in a way that's 180 degrees different from the networks.
So to piggyback on that, one of the things I found really interesting in the book about The Sopranos is, you know, listen, now everyone agrees Sopranos, greatest show of all time. It's legendary. But the book details very specifically that the show tested poorly with audiences. And HBO didn't know whether they were going to pick it up and go forward with it. And HBO, being HBO and not a network like CBS or ABC, NBC, said, you know, basically screw the testing. We're going to go through with it. It's crazy to think how close it might have come to never happening.
Well, I think that the reason why I dwelled on that in the book is because that's one of those proverbial forks in the road where the network, given the test results that came back for The Sopranos, a commercial network probably would not have gone ahead. And let's face it, they probably would not have cast James Gandolfini in the lead, because now we know him to be this remarkable actor, and we know that he could carry the show. Before, you know, that he wasn't a known star, and he had obviously great moments in Get Shorty and True Romance and other things, but a network would not have taken a show and put it on this guy's back. So once again, you see HBO making moves in a way that had never really been done in the industry before. I mean, when you think about it, look at Succession. I mean, they're still doing it because there's two things about Succession that scream out. One is there's no one that you fucking like. There's no one that you admire, that you want to hang out with, that you want to be. I mean, so much of television is aspirational, right?
Yeah.
But like, no offense against any of them, but who do you want to hang out with on a Sunday afternoon and have them over to brunch and just take a deep breath with? No one. And the second is that when they decided to do the show, Casey Bloys, who runs content and is really smart, says, we don't need a star. We believe in the material. We believe in the writing. We believe in this concept. We don't need to camouflage it or hedge our bets by, trying to get Jennifer Aniston to play Shiv or, whatever it might be. And both of those, those are two big power moves.
Another thing I loved in the book about the Sopranos, you go into great detail about the Pine Barrens episode, which there was a lot of great information in there. And how about the fact, I learned this in James's book, they had not planned for the snow. When they did all the rehearsals and scouted the location, it was supposed to be in the woods. And then there was a snowstorm and they had to incorporate it basically. And how much of a factor did the snow ends up playing in that episode? That is an amazing twist of fate right there.
It's just fantastic. Jeffrey Katzenberg, when he was at Disney, he used to have this rule that the audience doesn't like snow. And I think that for a long time, there weren't a lot of movies set in snow. He just, he had his reasons, but I can't look at that episode and think, what would it have been like without, obviously it still would have been a great show.
Right.
And it was written beautifully. Steve Buscemi you can go on and on, but the snow, each one of them talk about the fact that the snow came and they weren't going to back down. In fact, it led to Pine Barrens, obviously you know this, but you talk about the Sopranos' ability, that show's ability to combine fear, drama, and humor is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And a great nugget, too, that I learned in the book. You as a viewer, you think the whole episode is shot there in the woods, but the scene where Paulie and Christopher in the van eating the ketchup, that's shot on a soundstage because they had to worry about lighting and darkness and all that. So I loved learning about that episode in the book with those. Now, here's I find this interesting. The flip side of that, Sopranos tested poorly. HBO basically said, screw the testing, we're putting it on. Many, many years later, Lisa Kudrow, after Friends, gets a show called Comeback. I didn't watch it. I've heard nothing but good things about it. But it's one of those things. I know that it was only on for a season. So what am I going to watch it for now? And her show, according to the book, literally got canceled because of bad reviews from the media. I thought it was startling that an executive would admit that, but they admit it. And that's really what got that show canceled. What can you tell us about that whole episode?
Well, I think there are two cases where, look, it's easy and it's compelling and I have to do it, with shows that are hits to examine why they became hits and talk about some of the great moments and everything. But there are two shows that I kind of dig into around that time, The Comeback and Enlightened with Laura Dern. In both shows, you have unbelievable talent in the lead role, right? Laura Dern's been in movies since she was 12? She's one of our great actresses. Lisa Kudrow is only on one of the most successful comedies of all time and is an incredible comedian. Both of those shows last they exit HBO very, very quickly. Despite the fact Laura Dern wins the Golden Globe and, Lisa Kudrow wins it's unbelievable the way that HBO sometimes can hang in with something and other times turn and run. And I think I use both of those examples of the fact that HBO was changing and they started to really care about things they didn't.
Well, big theme in the book about that is Mad Men and Breaking Bad. When those two shows came on, Mad Men went to AMC, Breaking Bad was Showtime, and a lot of the narrative was like, why didn't
Breaking
HBO?
Bad was AMC too.
AMC. Why didn't HBO get these shows? Now, what's interesting to me too is, and this is again great part of the book, Mad Men, which I loved, went to AMC, and the creators and people who worked on it not crazy about the restrictions that AMC had on the show. Like I think in the book points out, John Hamm could say Jesus and he could say Christ, but he can't say Jesus Christ. Whereas HBO, anything goes, as you saw. So was that a sort of a turning point when Mad Men and Breaking Bad were not HBO shows, which everyone thought they would be based on what they are?
Look, first of all, you can't bat 1,000. The circumstances for each of those shows not being on HBO were different. I would go to another example, which is particularly formidable in terms of House of Cards. So House of Cards, HBO was interested in. They were ready to do a pilot. And then all of a sudden, David Fincher gets a 2-year season commitment from Netflix. And that, I think, is the moment where you realize, okay, wait a second, the world is shaking under our feet. This is a whole new dynamic. We're not in Kansas anymore. And I think that, I think that was important. And I would add a fourth to the list, which is that the producers and the great Peter Morgan came to HBO first with The Crown. They thought that HBO was the natural place for it. They wanted to be there. It wound up being a disastrous meeting for a variety of reasons. That went to Netflix as well. So you start to see, I mean, look, Netflix has always had some advantages. They're going to spend a lot more money. They don't have to show profits like HBO does. But I think that when you start to look, can you imagine House of Cards and The Crown not on Netflix but on HBO?
Right.
But those are significant.
Yeah. I've only gotten to page 635 out of the 950, so I haven't gotten to the,
you've only been
House of
reading
Cards
for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So
2 days in. So part of the book I love, because I love both those guys, so I have to mention this. I don't think the Ali G show gets the credit it deserves for being so groundbreaking. And when it was on originally, I remember being so completely blown away by the Ali G show. But there's a great story in the book that Jerry Seinfeld wanted to meet Sacha Baron Cohen because his wife loved Ali G so much. And Jerry had to call someone at HBO to set up a meeting. Now, here's Jerry Seinfeld, the biggest sitcom star in the universe with the most popular sitcom of all time. And he wants to meet Sacha Cohen. I thought that was a great story.
It was Jerry's wife, Jessica,
right.
who wanted to meet Sacha. But, it's one of those moments where, an employee at HBO feels like they're doing the Lord's work and is so excited about their ability to connect these people. And, I think they're still close to this day.
I love that nugget. One of the things that really struck me about the book is, I mean, you really forget about how much HBO has done. We know the shows, we talk about the shows all the time with Sopranos and Curb, Game of Thrones and Veep, everything. The documentaries, the music specials, I really enjoyed the beginning part of the book when you got into sort of the late 70s, early 80s, and just how it was so HBO was unlike everything they've seen. I think in the book, the first musical thing they did was a Bette Midler concert.
And early on.
Yeah. And just how that came about. And really just when you see everything they've done in the scope of your book, it is pretty remarkable.
HBO. I mean, look, Michael Fuchs was a big important part, and the people who worked with him at HBO were a big part of HBO's beginning. But if you're sitting there at the beginning of HBO and you're trying to figure out, what can be done, the best thing that they decided to do was not try and become a network. And how are the ways that we can do that? And if you're a comedian, like say in the late 70s or in the 80s, your big break is going to be Johnny Carson, right? So what happens when you go on Johnny Carson? You have like a 4.5 minute routine that you get to do, your stand-up routine. And of course it has to be previewed for the network censors. So there are certain things that you can say, certain words you can say, and certain things you can't say. And you have to memorize basically that routine. And you can't if you go outside those guardrails, man, you will be voted off the island. They will not let you back. So that's your big break. All of a sudden HBO says, screw that. Why don't you come on for an hour? Hey, Steve Martin. Hey, Robin Williams. Hey, Robert Klein. Hey, George Carlin. Come on for an hour and you can say whatever you want. So like George Carlin literally does the 7 words you can't say on television. I mean, that freedom and that strategy of making sure that, that's part of what started HBO. Uncensored, uncut movies without commercials. Lots of boxing, which, quite frankly, the networks have given up on. And then you start to get into this deep end of the pool with comedians saying and doing anything they want.
I wonder if anyone under 40 realizes that HBO didn't have original shows in terms of, I'm talking sitcoms and dramas, until probably 20 years into their existence almost.
Look, they were worried about, Michael Fuchs in particular, about the deficits that come with doing original programming. But the other thing that happened was they had no choice because, Jimmy, when you're advertising that we have uncut movies without commercials, and then all of a sudden you wake up one day and there's a Blockbuster on every freaking corner. Like, what are you gonna? It's like, oh well, we better change because that's not enough anymore. And so that's when we started moving into original programming.
I love that early part of your book when it really brought us back to that time when in the beginning HBO literally was the music specials and the stand up, like you mentioned, Carlin, Eddie Murphy. It was all, and then the movies, all that before they got into their original programming. It was so weird and different and new when that all took place. You've mentioned the name Michael Fuchs a couple of times. I wanted to keep this interview more to the shows for the mass audience that's listening to this, because I don't know if they know the behind the scenes names. I want to say this. If you like office gossip type of thing and drama in the workplace, the book is great. I mean, Jim has mentioned Michael Fuchs was a big time executive running HBO. He gets pushed out. They bring him back like 11 years later for some event. He was annoyed they didn't name something after him because he was such a big player. He goes and gives a speech and says, this is a watch they gave me when they fired me 11 years ago. And then he smashes the watch. But then he says it's only a $20 watch. And it was fake. If you love all that drama, a lot of that stuff is great in the book. I wanted to know, was that the real watch or was he telling the truth that it was a $20 watch?
Well, he didn't say it at the time. I found out that it was a fake watch.
Okay.
Like he threw it on the floor and then stepped on it and said, this is what I think of the watch. Basically, this is what I think of the watch you gave me, and stomped on it. And like people were like stunned because it was in front of a room of people who had contributed to the watch. But it turned out that he was, he used like a $20 Timex as a stunt. The
way the book intersperses the stuff that's going on with the shows and the office drama, I thought was very enjoyable because I like that stuff. Let's do a couple of sports things before we end it. Boxing was huge for HBO. I think everyone knows that for a very long time. I want to talk about Inside the NFL. Obviously, when that show ended, it wasn't a shock because the internet came along and made that show a little outdated. But that show had been on the air for so long. Len Dawson, Nick Bonacane became like these sports, legends because of Inside the NFL. And the way they got the axe was pretty disgusting. I mean, just after their last show told this was it, that's a wrap on it. No, sort of bells and whistles for a show like that. That had to hurt those people who worked on that show for so long.
It did. There's a great guy and a good, again, another name that people may not know, but it's just important. Dave Harmon, who worked on Inside the NFL, great producer. His father worked on the show. I think that when you have a show like that, that's so inextricably linked to the network and had been around for so long, and then it disappears. It was really rough. It was really rough for the people who worked on Wimbledon. Remember, HBO brought us Wimbledon during the week. Yeah. They would like take tapes from England, put it on the Concorde, so it comes back to the United States and we can see it. There was no other place to see it. So, and then they lose Wimbledon. They give up on that at the end of the century. I think that, one of the things that I tried to do was try and show just how attached people who work at these places get to these shows, and also us as viewers, and then all of a sudden one day it's gone. One day the world changes. They were so smart to say to boxing promoters like Don King and others, look, the networks have given up on boxing. ABC showed it in the afternoon on Saturdays when everybody was out, mowing their lawn and nobody saw it. They moved boxing to prime time. It was an incredible move. And they did it just in time for Mike Tyson, Tommy Hagler, Hearns, Sugar Ray. I mean, it's incredible. They had an unbelievable run with boxing.
Last thing, and it's sort of for my own ego and my own interest, because I loved it so much to this day. I was pleasantly shocked that you actually covered the infamous Vince McMahon interview with Bob Costas, where Vince basically wanted to kill Bob. And, at first I was a little surprised you covered it. I was like, oh man, he really covered everything. This isn't it. Then I see you actually got Vince McMahon to speak about it. I want to know how you got Vince to speak. Vince does not do interviews. How did you pull that off?
Well, I think, my plea was, I'm writing a book of record. Just like the Joe Buck, there are certain things that happen one time, but we're so caught up in them, like,
right.
And the lore after, about them continues to this day. So I said, look, I can write this without your perspective. I said, but I'm trying to do a book of record. And I think that, I'd really like to understand what went on from your perspective. And Bob talked to me as well, which I was deeply appreciative of. And I think that when you look at both of those guys talking about that day, you think, well, this could have been a lot worse.
Well, Vince said if Bob was taller, he would have popped him.
But you got to give, Costas is sitting hanging in there, right there. And, wasn't backing down. And I think that Vince was really honest, and it was rather compelling.
And how is interviewing Vince for you? He's one of the all-time characters that doesn't do interviews. So I'm just curious when you had a chat with him, how'd it go?
Well, I think that, there's a really cool thing that happens when people get to the level of Vince, right? Which is like, they don't give a shit except what they care about the truth, or at least the truth as they see it. And so there's no artificiality. He's not trying to spin anything. He's just like, you hook him up to a lie detector test. He is going to be believing every single word he says, and he does it with incredible force, unsurprisingly. Now,
I just realized, it just hit me in my head here. What you also cover in the book, I love this movie, The Late Shift, based off the Bill Carter book about Letterman and Leno and all that. You do cover that. And you actually got quotes from Letterman. Who was harder to get on the phone or via email, Letterman or Vince?
I talked to both of them. It was an email. I don't know.
Because Dave does not like to, and that topic too.
But Dave not only talked to me, but apologized to Michael Higgins Clark, because there's this whole saga when
he bumped him
to promote the movie, and Dave doesn't like the movie, and Dave winds up talking with Julia Roberts for an extra couple segments, and this guy gets bounced. Dave Letterman, God bless him. He literally says to me, look, you know what, Jim, I owe the guy an apology. This is what I was thinking at the time, again, trying to settle something for the record, and trying to explain what he was thinking about.
If anyone doesn't know, so HBO made this movie called The Late Shift, and the actor who played David Letterman was supposed to be on Dave's show. Dave, not a fan of the movie. And then the guy who played him got bumped, and Dave claimed it was an accident because he had Julia Roberts on that night, which kind of makes sense if he goes along with Julia, who was his favorite guest. But the one thing in your book, though, Dave claims he doesn't even remember the incident. That I found, I love Dave, but I found that one a little hard to believe.
He may have not remembered the particulars of the incident, but Dave was great for me in the CA book. And I was so glad to, it sounds weird. I was so glad to get Dave Letterman for the HBO book. And you think, what the hell are you talking about? He's
right.
HBO, but it was really worth it. He was an unbelievable prince about it.
Well, like I said, I'm 2/3 in. I love the book. If anyone is into media, pop culture, all those HBO shows, there is not a stone unturned. You did a great job with it, and I've enjoyed it, and I can't wait to finish the last 300 pages here this week. So thank you for coming on and chatting about
Jimmy,
Tinderbox.
Thank you.
My pleasure. All right. Take it easy, Jim. All right. It's time for our weekly Train of Thoughts segment here on the SI Media Podcast. I bring in my buddy Sal Licata from WFAN in New York and SNY TV. Sal, how was your Thanksgiving?
It was pretty good. I like everybody else, I overeat to the point of where I don't feel well. And then I had work early the next day and I just was miserable. It took me 4 days to recover. But other than that, it was great.
You said on the pod last week, sometimes you struggle balancing the football games with the family and the wife and the kid. So just wanted to make
sure. In my mind, I did a great job. But then I hear my wife say, you were locked into the football games all day. So I was like, what do you mean? I guess you're right. I was locked into the football games. The freaking Cowboys screwed me on a teaser. But yeah, it was. You try to balance, hanging out with the kids and talking to the family and pretending to listen to what they have to say while also being locked into the Lions and Cowboys throughout the day.
A lot of people, I think, were 38 million plus watched Cowboys Raiders.
I saw that, and I saw that it was the highest since '98. Why? What? Do you know the reason for that?
I think a couple of things. They now include something called out of home ratings. I don't know. I should know more about how it affects the number, but that's a factor. But you have the Cowboys and the Raiders.
Right. So that one game brings up the average for everybody that makes it the most since 98.
27 million people watched Bears Lions, which was
Insane.
Completely unwatchable.
Insane. Yeah, agreed. What was the number for the night game specifically? I missed that.
I don't remember the night game. I'd
just be curious with the drop off, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, America's team. They're not kidding with that.
And it was an exciting game. I mean, I was rooting for Dallas, but unfortunately I didn't get it done. But still, an exciting game. I think that helps too.
Definitely. That was a huge factor in it. Few topics to go through here during train of thoughts. I want to start with the college football coaching stuff. I know you're not a huge college football guy. You're here in New York where we don't have a team and it's not talked about that much on the fan. And I'm not going to get into like nuts and bolts of it. There's one thing I want to just get off my chest after seeing what's taken place. I mean, listen, the whole thing to me is kind of gross. And everybody should get as much money as they can and take whatever job they want. I have no issues with any of that. But this cannot happen during the season. It has to happen after the season. If all this happened the day after the national title game, I'd have no issues with it. But you have coaches leaving schools who are still playing games, who are still in the playoff hunt. I don't understand how anyone could think that's right. I don't understand.
Yeah, you know what's weird? That's an angle that I didn't even really think about. I was just thinking about it more. How could he leave these kids like that? And I get the money, but I think you bring up a great point. There's got to be a rule that's set in place. It is a free-for-all. That's why, you know what? That's why I'm turned off by college sports. It's such a dirty sport anyway. And then you have these guys, Brian Kelly. Now, I'm not blaming him for taking the most money. You're lying to young kids' face. These are not millionaire athletes. Right. You recruited them. You're lying to them, selling them a bill of goods. And it's the same BS. It's not just him. We've heard it from every coach over the years. It happened. Every good coach.
That's my issue. This is one of my hugest pet peeves in covering sports and with sports fans who are deranged is when sports fans try to compare sports to other things. Sports is unique. So I'm all for Brian Kelly getting whatever job he wants for whatever money he wants. What I don't like is when people don't use the excuse though, like you would do the same.
Right.
Everyone would do that. Okay. So like if I work at Sports Illustrated and I leave to go to ESPN or whatever, or if someone who works for Coke leaves to go to Pepsi, all that's fine. But there's a difference. This guy's coaching 80 kids. It's not the same as a regular job. So don't compare it to regular jobs. It's stupid.
You're not just worried about one individual. And on top of that, he's supposed to be a leader and set the example for these kids. And what type of example is that? Now, again, it's hard because I'm not blaming somebody for taking hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever it may be. But to bolt on your team in the middle of the season, that screams selfishness. That screams, I truly don't give a crap about you or this program. I care about me, which is fine. But ultimately, I think it shows the character, and you shouldn't be doing that as a head. There's got to be a better way, doesn't there?
I have no issue with it at all if he does it after the season. There's still, listen, if Iowa could ever beat Michigan, if Cincinnati, Notre Dame is like in the mix a little bit here, and he's not there. That is wrong. You should have to finish out the season, then go take whatever job you want. It's just not right.
Well, how could that happen? What kind of rules do we have here when he's obviously under contract? How could it happen that he could leave in the middle of the season? I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Every coach must have an out that he can, I think recruiting is, again, we're not big college football nuts, but the recruiting calendar, I think, is a factor in all this.
Right.
I mean, and then I saw a tweet this morning, I think someone who was supposed to go to Oklahoma now says he's not going there because Lincoln Riley left. And the whole thing is just, it's all gross. God. It's all just gross.
Agreed.
But and again, I'm here. I'll watch every game every Saturday. I'm there for it. I don't care about that stuff. Doesn't affect me, but just as a human being, like, can the guy stay there for the whole season?
Well, the question would become, let me ask you, what would happen now at LSU? See, if I'm being recruited and Brian Kelly comes to my house and says, I want you to come to LSU, I'd be like, you just bolted on your team mid-season. You think I'm going to trust you and come play for you? So me personally, I might have an issue with that. That should hurt them with recruiting. Now, it probably won't, but I'm just telling you from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if a 17 or 18-year-old is thinking that way.
That's fair. They're just thinking LSU, oh my God, you're famous and rich. Yeah, what the hell, help me out. I guess that's fair.
Yeah. Another topic here in train of thoughts. I thought this Will Ferrell, Adam McKay story. Are you a Will Ferrell guy? Because it seems like Will Ferrell's one of those people like you're either a big Will Ferrell guy or you're not.
It is funny that you say that. My
'Cause I would
mother
think you
and
would be.
yeah, my mother and wife hate him, but I love him. I've always loved Will Ferrell. Now, I'm not saying that every one of his movies are great. You know, I put like Adam Sandler and Chris Farley in a different category, but I like Will Ferrell a lot. And you know, to read that story and hear that he basically got bent out of shape to a point where he ruined his lifelong friendship with this guy because he wasn't cast in a movie. I thought that was a little
So if anyone
egotistical.
hasn't seen it yet, there's a big interview with Adam McKay in Vanity Fair. Adam McKay is basically Will Ferrell's partner in every movie, and they're doing a movie about the Showtime Lakers, and Adam McKay wants John Riley to play Jerry Buss, and Will Ferrell got pissed off that he's not getting the part and ended the partnership. Like they had a business and everything, so he ended the business and the friendship. What struck me about this is, you know, like Will Ferrell has, you know, he has more money than God, and like, you know, like can you maybe just suck this up and let someone else do the role? Like, you know, I don't. There's two sides to every story, so I don't want to come out and just say Will Ferrell's 100% wrong. Like I want to know what his side is. But here's the other thing that struck me about this: I've never seen Will Ferrell be Will Ferrell. He's always on, and he's always like I've never seen a serious Will Ferrell when he's on talk shows and the movies. He's always so. The fact I would pay money to see him get this news, and then I would love to see him mad in real life. Like, what would that look like? Because he's always goofing around.
And the issue that maybe he had with it, and again, you're right, who knows? We're just going based off of what we read from one guy's side of the story, but that McKay admitted to not handling it the right way. So that I could understand Ferrell being like, what the heck? Like, you don't even have the decency to come tell me. You got to beat around the bush. But there's probably a reason why he did. He was afraid to tell him because he knew what was going to be the fallout. The whole thing is just, I don't get how you could become, like I was thinking about that when we talked about the topics that we might discuss. And I was thinking about it in relation to you and I, because we're obviously friends. We've been friends for a long time. And then we start working together. And let's just say that there was some kind of issue. I still can never imagine it to a point where I'd be like, oh, I'm never talking to you again. Like, to get to that level, that is, when you've been friends for 25 plus years, how the hell does that even happen?
Right. So you hit on it. It wasn't even, if you believe the Adam McKay side of the story, it wasn't even so much that Will Ferrell didn't get the part of Jerry Buss. It was that Adam McKay didn't tell Will Ferrell. And I'm with you there. I could see being mad, pissed off. You need a break from each other, but he just ends everything just because, you know, he wasn't told the way he wanted to be told, and boom, it's all over. That's rough,
dude. Hey, you don't want to cross that, dude. I mean,
but it's so weird to me that it's Will Ferrell. Like, if you told me this was Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt or whatever, I can't imagine Will Ferrell being this angry. Like, I just can't.
Are you an Elf fan? That's one of my favorites.
No, I'm not.
Really?
Old School is the best Will Ferrell movie.
Step Brothers. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, I think it's okay. I don't.
Okay. I mean, some of them are just beyond dumb, but Francesa used to bust my chops all the time. Mike, you see Anchorman? Oh, it's the worst movie ever created. And I was telling him about Anchorman 2. He'd always bite. I'd always know what he was going to say, but those, you know, and they're stupid movies, but they're funny.
Old
I like
School
them.
is to me that's
an old movie now, you know.
Oh yeah,
which is crazy, but
because we're old. Speaking of stuff that goes on in entertainment, I just had James Andrew Miller on. He wrote this great book on HBO. So I wanted your HBO Mount Rushmore of shows, which now I have to say, I have discussed this before with people. I think maybe Kyle Brand or Schrager asked me this question when they were on once, and it really flustered me because it's hard to narrow. I'll tell you one thing from reading the book, which you don't realize. I mean, the amount of shows that have been on HBO that are just top level shows. If I said, give me your Mount Rushmore, could you come up with one?
Well, immediately I go to Sopranos. Like, there are some you have to think of, and I take these questions very seriously, and they are hard. I also would not go with, like, I saw some lists, True Detective. While I love that show, I'm not going with a show that's a short series. It's got to be a legitimate hit. So Sopranos immediately would be my number one. I'd probably go The Wire, Curb, and very difficult because there are great ones, as you said. I enjoyed 6 Feet Under. I enjoyed Boardwalk Empire. I'd probably go Game of Thrones 4. So Sopranos, Wire, Curb, Game of Thrones. If I could only pick the rest of my life 4 shows to watch from HBO, those would be the 4.
You've watched way more HBO shows than I have. Like I didn't watch Boardwalk Empire. I didn't watch Game of Thrones.
I don't know if you like Game of Thrones. Forget about it.
Yeah, there's no chance.
Boardwalk, I don't know if you'd like.
I watched, I think, the first couple of episodes, and then I was out.
What about The Wire? You've seen that one?
I have not. That's a bad one. I will watch that. I will watch.
Yeah,
that was like on my pandemic list, and then it fell through the cracks. But
you're saving your ass now. You're gonna get ripped for that one.
But like Game of Thrones, I'll never watch as long as I live.
I think that's understood. I think The Wire, you probably
I will watch it.
Yeah,
I will watch it.
What's your 4?
I mean, Sopranos, Curb. I think 3 for me would be the Ali G show.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one.
And then 4 would be really tough. I might go Veep.
Oh, good one.
But if
you're
I had
an Entourage guy,
I watched the first couple of seasons and then I realized it was literally the same thing every episode. And I Vince needs a movie deal and the little manager tries to get him a movie deal. And then the other guy comes in screaming. It was the same thing. So I stopped after like middle of the second.
I liked it, but Mount Rushmore is strong.
No, I would go Veep, Sopranos and Curb, no brainers. And it's the other 2 that you play. I mean, you have like things like Real Sports, which, is a not a docu, news kind of show, which is a great Ali G show would definitely be on it for me. I don't think there's a show that ever made me laugh harder in my life. And then I guess I would go Veep. But there's things like,
by the way,
there's
Sex in the City. I mean, I know maybe not for you or our cup of tea. That I think most people who have seen it, if you're
I watched a couple of episodes of that and thought it was the single worst show I've ever seen in my life. Like they're just, here's my thing with that show, with any show. When I watch a show, I want to like the people on the show. I don't know why. They were all horrible, horrible women.
Do you watch Love Life? That's on HBO.
I watched the first season with Anna Kendrick. I liked it a lot.
It was so good. I started the second season, which is good, but with Anna Kendrick, it was phenomenal. Yeah. I mean, I love Succession. I like Sex in the City, and I think a lot of people would probably put Sex in the City on. You're talking about Mount Rushmore biggest hits.
For you.
Right, exactly. Yeah. For me, no, I gave you my 4. I would go Sopranos, Wire, Curb, Game of Thrones. Those are my 4.
Speaking of Curb, I thought this week was phenomenal. Do you have any thoughts before I get into my? I mean, let me just say that only like in the first 5 minutes, he's mocking short people, fat people, and he did there was something else he did. It was just tremendous. It was just tremendous, Larry. But
this, I don't know if it's because I'm paying more attention to it because we kind of talk about it weekly here, but this has been a vintage Curb season. I just loved where, you're looking at the heavy guy on the roof and he's like, what the hell is this? But then at the end, Leon yelling at him, give me back my charger, you fat bleep, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, God, it was so...
I thought the charger thing was brilliant.
Yeah.
You're at 23%, I'm at 2%. I thought that was so good. Vince Vaughn has been tremendous on the show.
He's great. I love Vince Vaughn.
This was a classic. I mean, just him fighting with the woman because he didn't want her to carry the bags.
Oh God, yeah, also great.
You know what was interesting though? Susie was not in this episode.
Huh? I guess I didn't notice that.
Yeah, I noticed that she was not in, and I guess Richard Lewis will be back this week. I was thinking,
is he? He's coming back this week.
Next week they had him in the previous for next week.
Oh, all right.
But that was Larry just being able to make fun of everyone and no one else can do it. So that's why it was great.
Love it.
I thought of, so I'll give the listeners a little peek. So I basically invited myself to Sal's house on Sunday to watch football. And I was driving home and I was thinking that should be a Curb episode. Like when you invite yourself to someone's house, how you have to do it. There's a strategy involved. Like, you have to make it like, you can't be like, oh, I'm coming over.
With you and I, you could have just said, hey, I want to come over today and watch the games. Are you free? But you throw the nice out there. Are you watching the games by yourself today?
Yeah, that's the way to do it. And then I went for the sympathy and said, if I have to sit in my house and watch the Jets and Giants at 1:00, I'll kill myself.
Well, the thing that you should know is, for the most part, I'm going to be home watching the games.
Don't you think I knew that when I sent out the text?
Well, right.
Like I said, there's a strategy in the self-invite.
Right. But you're able to. So I always give you the open invite. So I'm not going to invite you every single week and go through that. But if you're free and hey, there are good games, what are you doing? Can I come by? It's fine. My wife doesn't care necessarily because it's only you, and because I'm downstairs watching the games anyway. What's the harm if you come and watch the games?
But Larry can do a good episode about him trying to invite himself to someone's house. I was thinking of that. That's because you got to be careful how you do it. Yeah. We haven't done this in a while. I'm going to wrap this up by reading you some reviews here because we got a few in over the holiday. Okay. And there's some good ones here, and then we'll say goodbye. I'll do it quickly. This first review came in from the Bragman Breakdown. This is on Apple. If you leave an Apple review, I will read it on one of these podcasts, just so you know. This is short and simple. I love this. The podcast I never knew I needed. I didn't know you needed it either, but I'm glad you found it. All right. Backstroke 03. I became a loyal listener during the pandemic and find Jimmy to be relatable. He asks insightful questions and throws in pop culture references that resonate with a 41-year-old from the Northeast. I always expect to hate the wrestling interviews, but I'm pleasantly surprised most times. Sal has been a great addition, and I look forward to that segment each week. Heard Sal mention that Jimmy lost 100 pounds when discussing the phony marathon bib picture. And to quote Doggy, that's a good job out of you. I did not lose 100 pounds, but I do appreciate that sentiment. And I still can't believe people thought I'd run a marathon.
I love he throws the Doggy thing in there. That's a good job.
I didn't realize you said I lost 100. Don't give people fake information.
Well, how much did you lose exactly?
Not 100. All right. 80s Villager. Meat stuffing is the topic. Thanksgiving stuffing with sausage is not called bread stuffing. It's called meat stuffing. Bread stuffing has no meat. Dolts. This guy's very upset about last week's podcast. Now, he did give it 4 stars, so he knocked a star off the rating because we were talking about stuffing, and I said it has to have sausage. You said yours has meat, and he's saying then that's not stuffing. I don't know where this guy's coming from, but
I mean, go fight with my grandmother and grandfather who've been telling me it's stuffing since I was born. I mean, it's stuffing. You could have different versions of it, but that to me, it's rice stuffing, I guess. Rice with chopped meat and celery, and you obviously have your sausage.
You could call it whatever you want. Give me sausage with the celery, the onions, and the bread. I don't care what you call it. Like I want my extra star back. Here's another review from a name I can't pronounce. FSCGIG, whatever. This podcast is appointment listening for me. The guests are outstanding, and I find the world of sports media to be fascinating. This is a 5-star podcast, and I believe my rating should carry some extra weight, as I am one who finds Jimmy's politics to be disgusting and cringeworthy. Despite that, I have to give the show 5 stars and would recommend it to everyone. P.S. I do hate the wrestling segments, but every commenter says that. Frank in Chicago.
Wow.
Now, that's a big person to hate my politics and still listen and give 5 stars.
You're repulsive. What did he say? What do you label you? Wow.
Cringeworthy.
Oh, yeah. Cringeworthy. I think that's good for you to where that shouldn't matter because you're providing good content and people enjoy you. It doesn't matter what your political take is. That's a good one.
Here's one from Smurf Dizzle. Love the guest. Best part of the show is train of thoughts. So there's another pop for Sal. Keep giving me WWE superstars regardless of what anybody says, and keep dropping Seinfeld references. Jimmy reminds me of George, LOL. Interviews are great. Only issue with this pod is the same issue Jimmy has with the Manningcast. Jimmy cuts off a lot of his guests mid-sentence, and oftentimes it kills a great conversation with him butting in and stammering. Other than that, I look forward to a new episode to drop. I get this all the time about the interrupting, and 1, I can't help it. 2, I don't want to do a question and answer thing. I want to have a conversation, so I'm always going to interrupt. I'll try to get better. I don't know what to say about it.
Butting in and interesting.
Now, here's what's funny about that review. Here's the last review I'm going to read you from Ridgecliff Monster. Great interview. Jimmy did a great job of just letting Al Michaels talk and guiding him through the interview. Really good listen. First one I've ever listened to. Literally ready for the next one. Curious how the interview with Becky Lynch goes. So I interrupt. I let Al go. They like the wrestling. They don't like the wrestling.
You know what I've learned?
I don't know what to do.
Just be yourself. You can't please everybody. And I learned that this week when the Mets signed Max Scherzer. And you would think, like, for a fan base that complains nonstop, you would think at least they'd enjoy it for a moment. The first call I get on the overnight, the guy's like, "Oh, this is a terrible signing. He's 38. What's going to happen when he gets hurt?" I'm like, what? You can't please everybody. Simple as that. The Mets go get Max freaking Scherzer and nobody's happy. So point is just got to be yourself and deal with it.
I wonder though how much of that is a New York thing. And, I think every team, I would assume outside of New York, anyone who would have signed Max Scherzer, the fans would have been happy. In New York, we're
I mean, you got a team like the Pirates signing Jared freaking Eichhoff, and the Mets give $43 million a year to Max Scherzer, and people are complaining.
I don't think you've learned the lesson yet that sports fans are not normal. They're way off their rocker. So you just
100%. That is 100% accurate.
But I love sports fans who listen to the SI Media podcast. So keep tuning in. All right, Sal.
Hey, we're two of them. We're both off our rocker too. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I sit there. There was a tweet yesterday about like someone the Yankees are going to sign, and in my head, all I'm thinking about is like John Sterling nicknames, and I'm like, I got to get a life. This is ridiculous. Spend 10 minutes trying to figure out what he's going to come up with. All right, Sal, have a good one. We'll see you next week.
All right, see you later.
All right, take it easy. All right, that wraps it up for this episode of the SI Media Podcast. My thanks to Jim Miller, Sal Licata. If you missed any recent episodes, dip into the archives and give them a listen. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to the SI Media Podcast. Recent guests in the past few weeks, Kenny Mayne, Becky Lynch from WWE, The Ringer's Kevin Clark, Al Michaels, all on the SI Media Podcast in recent weeks. Check them out in the archives, subscribe, and review. All right, that wraps it up. We'll see you next week right here on the SI Media Podcast. Stay safe. Take care.